Music is a universal language. And just as every note has a different vibration, every human being vibrates differently.
I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, the only podcast, the only classical music podcast with the nerve, Scott. Am I lying? We're the only ones with the nerve to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
I can't argue.
This is the episode about violinist Louis Farrakhan. So, you know, what that means for you first and foremost. We are exploring a story in classical music that has not often been explored. When I found out that he played violin, when I came across this video on YouTube, I was shocked that I had no idea. This is TRILLOQUY, you know, the true and real. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's a story and a topic that needs to be explored. So that's what we're doing today. So I understand that's, you know, rough for a lot of people, and I get it. I've spent a lot of time over these past couple weeks reading everything I can, watching every video interview I can, and, you know, I think that this is just something that the classical music world deserves to know about. And as I said, we're the only ones with the nerve. Who else, Scott?
Okay, so can you, for folks like me who have heard the name and don't have much background on him, only that it's been largely negative, why is this something that hasn't been approached before?
Because of how seemingly so-called controversial the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is. You know, just as you'll hear in one of the interviews that I put together for this opus, you know, his politics, the way he views religion. He's been called anti-Semitic, homophobic. You know, there are things that I would agree would fall in some of those lines, but one of the things we're going to just explore in this opus is, you know, what that means. What relationship does that have with the piece of music he performed? The relationship we should have with the recording, what that means for other musicians and performers, and their legacy, cancel culture, you know, just that whole thing. So I just wanted to get that out in the front, that this is what this episode, this opus is about. So,
okay.
Yeah. Before we get into movement one, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Craig, who's listening from Nashville. We're going to throw an accidental your way here at movement one. I want to shout out Evan Clark, who is officially a member of the team. Scott, how about you tell the folks what Evan is doing?
Evan Clark is the guy who takes all of the recording that Garrett and I do after I've put all the sound effects and the music clips and gotten everything lined up. Evan's the one that makes it sound nice.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Evan. I wish that, you know, I could be paying Evan, but you can learn a little bit more about him on our on the TRILLOQUY website.
He's getting a growler per episode from me. He's getting homebrew.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm glad someone's paying him.
Yeah.
I wish we had a social media person. If you want to, if you're black, I think the next person that we add to the team needs to be black. I mean, we need to keep it, you know, diverse. For goodness sake. If you want to do social media, and you're hearing this right now, reach out to me. Let's talk about something. We'll let you. No, maybe there could be something that could be worked out, but we'll see. So, yeah, shout out to Evan. Thank you for everything you're doing. Shout out to Amanda Cook. I care if you listen. One of the interviews that we're offering today, and also a huge shout out to Caroline Diva is as Diva does Jones, who I talked to as well.
I just love the nickname.
It's a way of life as well, as she would tell you. All right, let's get into movement one. All right, checking accidental. So a big fat natural to start off these accidentals for this week. for our roots conversation.
Right.
Apparently, we kind of did a shitty job of. Well, I mean, and as I admitted, roots is a whole genre that is new to me. It's a sound that is peripheral to the blues I'm used to, but as Craig, who listens from Nashville, shout out to him, so kindly pointed out, it is a very definable genre with a huge history to it.
Yeah, he said that he cringed when he heard that. And just let me say this. Keep listening, because there's far more. There's far better stuff to cringe over than what you heard there on the Roots conversation.
But I really did appreciate the feedback. I've gone through and listened to a few more things. I wanted to just say a few names that he threw our way. He thinks talking about Charlie Pride would be great for this podcast in the future, and also Mickey Guyton, if I'm saying that name correctly.
I'm not familiar with it.
But we may even invite Craig onto the show, because he does his own thing down in Nashville. It sounds like at the intersection of roots and country and blues and these different conversations. So just wanted to shout out Craig. Thank you so much for listening and pointing us in a better direction, because our roots break down.
Yeah, actually, speaking of Evan, while he was mixing this, he sent me a text. I could tell where he was mixing it. He got to the roots section because he texted me, DeFord Bailey. So go check out DeFord Bailey. And the more I think about it, maybe a current roots artist that I've actually seen play is Corey Glover.
Okay.
So maybe check him out too.
Yeah, shout out to all these roots artists. All right. That's a big natural for me. Do you have an accidental?
No, I'm going to hold on to it because we got a lot to get through today.
Okay, so I'm just going to say now, I do have to put a flat, just something that's kind of dampen the mood. There have been, actually now I've recently learned a couple deaths in music today. The one I heard about earlier was the passing of Ennio Morricone, who I'll bring up here in a second. But I want to put a big fat sharp next to, my discovery of Louis Farrakhan being a violinist. So somehow I came across this video, and after a bit of research, I found out that this was coordinated with an orchestra in Chicago. They created a documentary around it, and how despite the fact that he's been, accused of anti-Semitism and has said, anti-Semitist things, he is this hidden talent of his that he'd never really talked about, being able to play the violin. He wanted to bring it back with a piece of music by a Jewish composer. His teacher, who taught him for 2 years in preparation for the concert, is a Jewish woman, and it was seen by many as this just united thing. But because of, what his reputation is, it's been hard for a lot of people to, stomach who he is. And I think that plays a big role in this part of music history, music present. Classical music just isn't something that we know about. Now, you said you weren't really familiar with him.
No. I remember I've heard his name. But like when we were talking earlier, in school, things were broken out in units, so we had, maybe 2-3 weeks where we would spend on, here's indigenous history, here's some black history, here's Hispanic. And it just seemed like that it just was lopped off after that. Now we're on to the next thing. And the names that I remember obviously were Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Marcus Garvey. Those were the ones that we covered. And then anytime Farrakhan's name did come up, there was always somebody around to say something negative.
Right. And just and because you're not so familiar, I can just frame it this way. I've had to do a lot of Farrakhan reading. He tells a story about being a little kid and being used to seeing images of white Jesus and this other thing just around the house and just everywhere. He visits his uncle in New York and sees a black man's picture on the wall. and asked his uncle, "Who is that?" Well, it was a picture of Marcus Garvey, and this is a young Farrakhan, a child Farrakhan, asking his uncle about Marcus Garvey and learning and like realizing this is like, the man I want to be around. I want to, work on black liberation. I want us to be free too. And of course, his uncle broke his heart by telling him that Marcus Garvey had passed, but was somehow connected to the local mosque. And that's where he met the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and became one of his proteges. And now, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is seen as, this great minister for the Nation of Islam. So, a lot of his work, all of his work, I'm sure he would say, is rooted in black freedom and black liberation. But, when you really center blackness in that way and talk about economics, talk about a set of reparations, and do so unapologetically, you're gonna, bruise a couple feelings along the way, I'm sure, right?
Sure.
So I think a lot of it has to do with that, and I don't want to spend much time at all just, trying to cover my tracks. As I said in the intro, it's a conversation that I think classical music deserves, and we're here to deliver it because obviously the other people would not, and we would know about it, right? This would be more of a thing. I think so. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, because we talked a little bit about how this just shows some of the gaping holes in education.
It just and I get in my feelings upset about it because this is just something we should know. And,
Sure.
And for me to just happen to stumble upon this and for me to share it on Facebook and to see so many other people who had no idea.
Okay, so there's loads of clips from Donahue, right? Now, that's my era.
Yeah.
I was 20 years old when that was on. Now, I don't think that would make it over broadcast air. Maybe cable today,
Yeah.
but not over the air, just free TV.
Probably not.
Do you think that for somebody who doesn't know anything about him, is that a place to start?
It could be. I mean, that's where you get to hear him in his words. I definitely, I think it would be easy to get lost in the sauce if you like went for a sermons or something. If you get to hear him just talk about the world, it's great to get that perspective. But I'll tell you, as it applies to what we're talking about, I'm not here advertising for the Nation of Islam. Start with a documentary. There's a documentary called For the Love of Music, and it's about exactly what we're exploring here. His perspective in this documentary is showing us his journey back to music and to this performance in Chicago, which was precipitated by, did I say that word right? Precipitated. It came after a concert in North Carolina, which ended up serving as the first Gateway's music festival performance. So we're going to explore that, as I mentioned in the intro, again with Amanda Cook from I Care If You Listen. And then I was so lucky to get the words of Caroline Jones, who was at the performance, performed with Farrakhan at the concert in North Carolina and at that first Gateways Festival. So you'll get to hear about the formation of a very important Black classical music institution and a historic, figure in this so-called classical music who we're just not allowed to learn about because of a controversial perspective that folks have on them.
You've already gotten pushback, though, before this even drops.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mentioned Farrakhan just in passing. I think, as I mentioned, we were talking about before on the Kwanzaa Opus, and very friendly, pushback, but, just this idea, well, just make sure that he said this or he represents that. So, folks who know, folks who are familiar with his controversies, know, and folks who, and my opinion is that folks who have taken the time to, dig in, have been offered a different perspective. I've been offered one, and I hope we can offer that today. But, let's not spend too much time, stirring the soup here. Before we get into the conversation with Amanda, I just wanted to note Ennio Morricone. And, the older we get, the more of these names that we know whose, music is sort of alive to us because we know they're alive. It's sort of like, wow, that person is gone.
That was part of the soundtrack of my early youth, staying up and watching spaghetti westerns after hours with my brothers. What a treat, and he wrote so many of the soundtracks for all those. Clint Eastwood probably owes the beginning of his career to the music that Morricone was writing.
Now, folks who don't know his name, just think of all of those westerns, and most famously a theme that came up in a little article that you read today, right?
That's right. I think that it's kind of a nice coincidence that in the interview with Amanda, she brings up Judd Greenstein because I found it through his Twitter feed, this story.
Okay.
Yeah. The Washington Post, in their announcement of Morricone's passing, he says, the Italian composer who wrote the theme, there you go, to the good, bad, and the ugly. Now, you have to see that they wrote out E, right? Okay, so Judd's response was, come on, no. He asked composers, would you represent your entire output in one absurdly verbalized phrase of your most well-known theme? I guess in my case it would be so
let's break that down. Let's make sure we're not playing too much inside baseball. So basically what he's saying is, in this whole grand catalog, you're choosing this one little thing and trivializing it down to automatopoeia. Yeah, I think that's a little tone deaf. I don't know. This is not the Trilloquy, but his output for me, became real through The Hateful Eight. Is that a movie that that you've seen?
Brilliant.
So I saw it at the theaters. Actually, I was almost late to a rehearsal. I think a Nutcracker rehearsal because the movie was a little longer than I thought it was. And just listening to that opening music, I was like, whoa, what is it? That was one of the first times I was really drawn in by the music that opened up a movie. And,
you can hear when they know what they're doing.
And it's just so menacing and evil, and big use of the bassoon. So we'll listen to a little bit of that as we transition into the conversation with Amanda Cook. But rest in peace to Ennio Morricone. What a phenomenal career, and what an impactful one. It's important to note, I would say, that everyone would know that so-called ah theme.
I didn't know how else to say it. And Judd says, don't put what I just sung from his catalog in his obit, or he would haunt your ass. But Judd, go ahead, because I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, but I'll put a link in the description. Go look up a little bit of his music beyond the and and just appreciate what he did for all of us, what he did for film music. Quincy Jones himself today tweeted about his admiration for Ennio Morricone. So shout out to him. Rest in peace to him. Warm thoughts to his family. Here's a little bit of his score from The Hateful Eight to take us into our conversation with Amanda Cook. So Amanda, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but and I try to avoid common questions as much as I can, but this is one that I couldn't help myself with. So when I think about I care if you listen, who is doing the listening and who's doing the talking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question that we're trying to learn a more detailed answer to more and more every day. We're trying to learn more about our audience in particular. So we have what Google Analytics will tell us, which is a very binary way of looking at gender and some other demographics, location. But one interesting thing that I just learned is when I took over as editor-in-chief about 3 years ago, we had a pretty large disparity between male and female readers. Again, talking about gender in a binary way
Sure.
because that's what Google Analytics will tell us. But we had about 60% male readership and 40% female readership. And we have just recently, within the past couple of months, closed that gap and flipped it to where we have a slightly higher female readership than male readership. So
Was
I'm
that
glad
surprising to
to.
find?
It was, but I think that it's a reaction to the content that we're publishing now. We've seen a huge surge in our readership ever since we have started to focus more on historically underrepresented and marginalized people in classical music. And Garrett, I remember listening to you talk about the same sort of thing happening to you with your radio show. I think you were talking at Sphinx about how as soon as you started intentionally programming these voices that are often left out of the conversation, how you saw your engagement really take off. And
Right,
and we're
right.
really experiencing a lot of the same thing. So just anecdotally, what we know about people who are reading and sharing our content is that it's very diverse in terms of who the people are in this ecosystem of contemporary music. It's composers, it's performers, it's arts administrators, publicists, orchestras, institutions, people who are just curious about contemporary music, people who are students. We're seeing more and more in our referral stats that people are coming to us from their university's Blackboard or whatever their online learning system is. So that's great that we're being included on syllabi. And then in terms of who is doing the writing, we have a team of 40 to 50 volunteer contributors. And right now, because we're operating on an all volunteer structure, we have a lot of people kept in a fairly slow rotation so that we're not asking too much of any one given person. But our writer team is coming from a lot of different backgrounds as well. We have composers and performers. We have musicologists, we have music theorists, we have university professors, we have people who work for nonprofits. So in terms of professionally, we have a fairly diverse set of viewpoints. In terms of race, not so much, mostly because we're operating on this volunteer structure, and it takes a certain amount of privilege to be able to put in that volunteered time. So as we move forward, we're definitely looking for ways that we can financially support our writers, and then we can start to include more BIPOC voices on our team.
Yeah, the volunteer nature of so much of this work is something that I've started to think about a lot when it comes to Triloquy. I mean, considering how hard up so many people are these days, month 6 or 7 of this coronavirus era. How do you move forward when it comes to asking things of your team, but understanding that it's only being done on a volunteer basis?
It's tough. And especially in these past couple of months, I've had conversations with people on my team who have just been having a hard time being creative and getting stuff done. And I mean, I think we all are kind of there to a certain extent where
Yeah.
it's hard to keep up with the productivity. It's hard to keep producing things. And so we've just been moving a little bit slower. We've been trying to get things out with longer timelines and deadlines just to give people more time and space. So it takes a little bit more work on my part to just anticipate and try to give people more time. And we're just continuing to do the best we can with the resources that we have.
Yep.
I have a question for you that deals with something that Garrett and I are going to talk about a little bit later. The difference between canceling and calling out. Okay. Calling out is different in that you've got a shot. Okay. Somebody has brought something to your attention and you have a chance to make some sort of change. So as I was looking at your website and noticing, like you said, you have a lot of diversity as far as background, but as far as race is concerned, it looks pretty white. And I was wondering, As sometimes my position here on this podcast has been questioned, I'm curious if anybody has called you out on that. And if so, what was your response?
Well, so there's the content that we're covering and then the people who are producing the content. And
Okay.
so I've sort of had this question come up on both sides of that. So when I took over as editor about 3 years ago, that's when I started really implementing this conscious effort to prioritize underrepresented and marginalized artists. And I heard some rumblings from some people that the perception was that we only cared about white feminism. And I was trying very hard to work against that, but it made me work even harder, because if that's anyone's perception of the work that we're doing, then we need to listen to that and we need to do better. And sometimes it doesn't matter that you're trying. It's just the product that you're putting out is the product that you're putting out. So hearing that was a perception to some people really kind of lit a fire under me to do better and to make sure that it's very, very clear who we're trying to promote on our platform.
Yeah.
And in terms of the writer team, I mean, I think what's interesting to me is that a lot of people still don't realize that we're operating 100% volunteer. So once that conversation happens, then I think the makeup of our contributor team makes more sense.
Yeah.
Our contributor team is comprised of people who just voluntarily respond to our calls for contributors. It's people who self-elect and say, I have the time and the capacity to do this. But moving forward, we're really looking at I Care If You Listen long term. And one of our top priorities is having the contributor team match the diversity of voices that we're covering in terms of our content and being able to engage more people in this conversation. It's not just about the people that we're writing about, it's the people who are writing the words too. And New Music Gathering just wrapped up, and I don't know if the two of you are involved in the New Music Gathering circles, but there was a really great roundtable discussion panel on practicing anti-racism in contemporary music. And Anthony Green was one of the panelists. And I just love listening to everything he has to say. I learned so much from listening to him. And one of the main things he called out was just music criticism needs to do better. I think a couple weeks ago, even the two of you were talking about that piece in the New York Times about Sheku and that headline. And it's like, if you have BIPOC voices in the room, then chances are you're not only not going to step in it like that, but but you're also going to open yourself up to so many more new perspectives and stories. And so that's really where we're trying to get.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about I Care If You Listen is the diverse backgrounds and perspectives that are represented, including, very graciously in an interview that featured me. And I actually, Amanda, if you don't mind, want to turn around one of the questions that you asked me to you. So the question rose up, how do I justify foregrounding racial equity in a world where ageism is a thing, ableism, obviously the patriarchy. What about for you? What do you foreground and how do you justify doing that?
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head with your answer in that interview, which is that we have all of these identities intersecting, but talking about racial equity is talking about gender equity. Talking about racial equity is talking about where that intersects with ableism. And I think that in our field in particular, we have these very structurally racist and discriminatory practices. And that's the main thing that we really need to tackle. And so, yes, we have all of these other intersecting problems, but it's not like we're not talking about them by making racial equity our primary focus.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course these, you mentioned, shifting the type of content that you did sort of precipitated a surge in readership, with all of the conversations concerning race being heightened these days. I wonder if you've seen even more of a surge. I mean, we we certainly have.
Yeah, we have. Over the past couple of months, we have had some of our best months of web traffic yet. And that's largely due to a couple of particular articles. Right at the beginning of the COVID shutdown, we put together a list of resources for artists, artist relief funds, different grants that people could apply for that we were continually updating throughout the month of March when we really saw all of these mass cancellations happening. So that brought a lot of people to our site. And also, Mary Kiumjian wrote an absolutely beautiful essay called, I might not get the title exactly right, but it was essentially, I'm a composer and I am choosing not to create original art right now. I'm choosing not to compose right now. And that saw a lot of traffic, and I think gave people this sense of not only relief, but also permission to just take some time and process everything that's happening right now.
Hmm.
So those have been some of the two big drivers of traffic to our site, which is great because I think it's a reflection of what we're trying to do, provide resources to people, and then also provide a platform for artists to be able to share what's happening with them in a way that they feel comfortable, being able to provide a platform where people are comfortable being vulnerable. I mean, Mary's essay was deeply personal, and I just feel incredibly, incredibly grateful that she trusted us with her words and her thoughts on this. But we're also seeing that we have new audiences for older content that we've put out,
Same.
especially. Yeah, it's incredible. So, um, as some institutions are now scrambling to try to say, oh, well, we care about Black people and we're, and putting out all these statements that don't mean anything. Not to like kind of pat ourselves on the back, but like we've kind of been able to pull out the receipts a little bit and show that we've been doing this work. And so some of our past essays in particular, Alex Blake, who is the founder of Tonality, which is a excellent choir out in LA. If you don't know them, you should definitely check them out. But he wrote this amazing essay for us on social justice programming and how it's not enough to just draw attention to an issue through music, but you have to give people ways to step out into their community and do the work. So that one's been really popular. And so I mean, it's great that we're finding new audiences. And on one hand, I guess you can kind of think of it as, like, see, we've been doing this work and you haven't been paying attention. But on the other hand, you can't be too angry at people for being late to the party. If they arrive eventually, then, we're going to welcome them. If they want to do the work, then, we'll bring them on board.
Yeah, I've been wrestling with that idea for weeks now because, like I Care If You Listen, Trilloquy has been engaging these conversations, and it's sort of complicated. When at least for me, when I think about, well, I've been here all this time. Do I need to spend that energy being frustrated, or do I need to spend that energy moving forward, or
Exactly.
or exploring different things? So Amanda, you happen to be coming to us this week when Scott and I have something particularly, I hate calling conversations uncomfortable, but it will certainly be uncomfortable for many. So the video footage of Louis Farrakhan performing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto has reemerged, and after me doing all sorts of research about that performance, I learned some of the connections that I have to it. His warm up performance for the performance that's on the internet on YouTube being the first Gateways Music Festival performance, which is a festival for folks who don't know, to this day celebrates the achievement of Black people and members of the African diaspora in classical music, so-called classical music, as I've been saying for a while. And of course, with Louis Farrakhan being such a controversial figure, it brings up, the conversation, as Scott mentioned before, of canceling, of, who gets to sit on this pedestal of great musicianship and who that doesn't apply to. But before I jumped into that, before we jump into that conversation, Amanda, I just kind of wanted to know your relationship with Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. I know it. I Care If You Listen. The focus is mostly on new music, but I mean, surely this really old piece of music has impacted your career to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly involved in contemporary music now, but I have 3 degrees in flute performance. I have, I was on that very traditional music education
I'm sure
track.
your Daphne
So,
sounds beautiful.
oh, thank you, thank you. But yeah, so I mean, like it's a piece that comes up. I can't say that it has any particular meaning to me, but it's just kind of one of those pieces that you get to know if you're in music school.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Scott, you were no music student, but surely this is a piece of music that you have a lot of experience pressing play on, right?
Absolutely, especially that first movement. And he said that when he was writing that melody was running through his head for 6 years.
Wow, wow.
Mm.
So imagine having that earworm going and
Yeah, for 6 years. Wow. Yeah. And, when I think about the piece of music, not to tell too long of a story, but I remember the first time going to what do you call the museums in DC? The the blank for natural history, or the Smithsonian, visiting the Smithsonian museums, and I went into the one for one of the ones for visual art, and I was exposed to the paintings of Degas. And I remember this one painting of a ballerina, like rubbing her sore feet, still in this beautiful costume. And when I hear the opening moments of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, I think of that. I think of the beauty of this so-called classical music, but the costs and the price that folks, composers, performers, advocates have had to pay for it over the years. So, it's just an invaluable composition, in my opinion. But again, when we talk about Louis Farrakhan's performance of it, folks begin to question, maybe not the value of that piece of music, but the value of the performance. Amanda, as it applies to that specifically, or beyond, have you ever thought about or had to engage the conversation of applying value and taking away value based on who's presenting it?
Well, it's this whole separating the art from the artist conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is something that you said just in the introduction to this topic of you asked who gets to sit on this pedestal, and maybe the problem is that we have a pedestal that we're putting people on. And I think that's where we get into issues where we have these stars who are too great to fail, and then we find out that they're doing horrible things and they're terrible people. Side note, I just saw that James Levine has been engaged to conduct in Italy in 2021. And it's like, how have we not canceled this dude? Speaking of cancel culture, that's someone who deserves to be canceled. And of course, he's conducting Damnation of Faust, which is just like chef's kiss, like
Yeah.
ironic.
Yeah.
But, I think with classical music, it's really interesting because it can either be something that deeply humanizes someone as a performer, like, oh, they're this sensitive person, they're this artist, or it can be something that lifts people up onto this pedestal, onto this untouchable, transcendent astral plane of existence. And so I think it's also interesting how that changes depending on what angle people are coming at it from. So for someone like Farrakhan, it's then has, I think, maybe this like humanizing effect, right? But then for performers, people who are coming from that classical background, then it tends to have this elevating effect sometimes. So it's just interesting how through the lens of classical music, depending on what perspective people are coming from, it changes.
And one of the other conversations that I've had to engage since discovering for myself this performance is the conversation of musical excellence. So we've gotten to this stage in so-called classical music to where if something is not studio quality perfect, whatever perfect means, even if in live performance, it's up for critique. But again, only for certain people. If you go back and look at some of the performances of Leonard Bernstein, especially the performances of the piano concertos where he's leading from the piano. There are plenty of missed notes and smeared bars, which is fine as far as I'm concerned, but we don't allow that same energy, or at least people I've been engaged with haven't allowed that same energy for this Farrakhan performance. The first things that they point out, if it's not how evil of a person he is allegedly, is how it's not really a professional quality performance. How have you engaged that conversation, the idea of quality being attached not to a piece of music, but to a specific performance of a piece of music?
This is something that I'm hoping will be a positive outcome of the pandemic and of our current situation, because people are still performing. People are still putting music out, whether it's through live stream or Zoom, or people are finding new platforms for performance, and they're very imperfect. But I hope that in some way it can help us lower that perfection standard. And I hope that it can also help us engage in a more accessible way. I mean, what would it mean if we lowered our standards in terms of fidelity for things like college pre-screening recordings? How would that help more people be able to access this music and our education systems that we have in place? And if we're not requiring that things be studio level perfect in terms of recordings, then how much more accessible does that make it for people to get their music out there and for people to engage with it? So this has been something that I've actually been thinking about a lot over the past couple of months, and just seeing the art that's coming out. And I just, not that there are going to be many positive outcomes of the pandemic, but I hope that maybe having to rethink the way that we make and share our art, maybe that's something that we'll reconsider.
Scott, do you feel like we sort of reinforce that reality in our jobs of presenting classical recordings on the radio? I mean, we
Yeah,
have
to a
these
degree.
we have these studio created things that don't really have many errors, whatever an error is.
Put a pin in that, because I want to go back to something that Amanda was talking about as far as rating the recording. Like you said, if they're not bashing on Farrakhan as a person, then they're saying, well, his technique is shit.
Right.
One of those two, right? So then they need to be ready to smear that across every performance, even the ones that they do like from performers that they like that are problematic. So I don't know I don't think that Mendelssohn was problematic, was he? I mean, he was a family man, right? He didn't.
We haven't dug through his tweets enough yet.
All right, so that's a good point. But I think that people need to be ready to apply that rule across all the performances, then even the problematic ones of people that they like. And as far as what we do on the air, I think that it's really hard for a live performance to get pulled off well in a recording, because so much of it depends on the electricity in the hall, doesn't it? And if you're not experiencing that same electricity, then maybe you would prefer a studio recording to a live one. Is that what you were getting at?
I suppose so, but also, a person who, is used to listening to, classical music on the radio, and then finally goes to that concert and hears their favorite piece of music, with a wrong note in the flute solo, something you'd never be accused of, Amanda. But
Oh no, never. But actually, yeah, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's really interesting how this to me seems like a unique problem one of the many unique problems of the canon, having these pieces of music that have become so played, maybe even overplayed and so familiar that we pick apart every little measure and every little phrase. Amanda, am I right in saying that seems to be more of a problem with the canon, or is this an issue that comes in the world of new music as well?
No, I think you're right. I think it's mostly a problem with the canon. And I think that's why people who gravitate toward new music are so drawn to it, because there isn't that same intense scrutiny and standard for perfection. And then, of course, you have the critics who say, oh, well, with contemporary music, who would know if you played a wrong note because it all sounds like wrong notes or whatever. And I think that's kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of contemporary music is more textural, it's more gestural. It's not about this technique perfection in the conservatory way that we conceive of it. I mean, that's not to say that it is not technically challenging. I think that it is some of the most technically challenging music out there. What some of these really practiced contemporary performers are able to do, the ones that specialize in new music, it's incredible. It's mind blowing. But yeah, so I think that is more of a problem with the canonical rep, just because we have this built up expectation where with new music, it's more about the discovery. It's more about just being in this moment. It's more about artists just trying to share something. I think it makes it easier to connect on more of a human level too, because you're engaging with a living artist.
Right, right. But what about some of the pieces of new music, or at least newer music, that are becoming sort of a regular part of the conversation? I think the last time the three of us spoke, we talked a little bit about "Change" by Judd Greenstein. I mean, that's a tune that folks are beginning to be used to, but can't a piece of music like that even fall victim to, oh wait, that note was missed, or the electric guitar didn't do this, or can that not apply?
No, it can, absolutely. And I mean, the more, of course, we want new music to have repeat performances. Of course, we want it to be recorded. Of course, we want it to attain some level of canon, but we're so critical of the canon that how do we make sure that these new pieces that we're putting forth don't then end up in this same kind of eye rolling canon situation that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, yeah. So to sort of tie, the conversation we're having about Farrakhan and what that means to new music, and specifically, I Care If You Listen. As we move forward, I mentioned digging through Mendelssohn's tweets. Well, for those of us who are alive, that is very much a thing, and more musicians are getting called out for problematic statements and actions that have been seen as inequitable. Is this a conversation that you've had to actively engage when it comes to some of the content that I Care If You Listen has produced? And if not, what would be your approach moving forward? Let's say that this phenomenal essay comes out on your website, and a week later you find out that this person said whatever. What would be the way to move forward?
This has actually happened not in terms of any of the people producing content on my site, but people that we've covered on the site. So artists that we're choosing to feature. And I did actually have someone get in touch with me recently to say that one of the artists that we had been covering, she had been like in an abusive relationship with him, and she asked me like, I would like it if you don't cover this person anymore. And I agreed to not cover this artist anymore because there are just so many people doing good work. There are so many people who don't have these deeply problematic things in their past that we don't need to be wasting our time on the
Yeah.
people who do. So, I mean, it was definitely a tough conversation, and I was really glad that this person brought it to my attention. I guess the thing that's hardest is that you just never know. And so it takes someone being brave enough to kind of get in touch with you and speak up on something like that to really know what you're dealing with. And I think it just has to be dealt with on a very personal and case by case basis. The thing that's tough is this we've already referenced this, but this sort of call out culture that we see, where I think it's helpful to call things out. But if you want actual change to happen, then sometimes it takes just reaching out to someone personally, instead of, I mean, for larger institutions, yeah, sure, drag them on Twitter looking at you, Metropolitan Opera. Um,
Oh, shots fired.
but yeah, I mean, it's like, I think things get accomplished much easier if you're able to just kind of connect to someone who will really listen and who is in a position to actually do something about it.
Yeah. And that actually, leads me to one of the final questions I have for you. What is the measure of that when we can't personally reach out? The example that folks always bring up is Wagner, but there are so many other examples. In your opinion, how do you measure it? What is the line in the sand between, well, this can get a pass, and no, this needs to be locked up into the vault?
I mean, do we really need Wagner? But really, though,
Yeah, sure.
like, do we really need Wagner? And if it's hurting people, then I mean, it doesn't matter what level of greatness we try to put Wagner on. If it's something that's perpetuating something that's hurting people, then why are we doing it?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the point I make concerning Wagner and just the canon in general. Maybe not even necessarily the problematic corners of it. There's so much more to be discovered. But again, I don't think anything is really black and white, because as hurtful as performances like Farrakhan's and Mendelssohn could be for many people, for others it's empowering. Again, that did mark the beginning of a classical music institution that is focused on the celebration of Black musicians and Black music creators. So, yeah, I guess the conversation continues. We'll we haven't quite reached the end of it. Maybe we never will.
And I think the most important thing is that it's an ongoing conversation and that we just keep talking about it and we keep evaluating it and we talk about it with people who are outside of our usual circles because, we might have our minds made up when we talk to the people that we're used to talking to every day. But if we reach outside of our regular communities, then we might find that people are having different conversations elsewhere. So I think it's important that we just keep talking about it.
And reaching outside of your regular communities is something that I say I Care If You Listen has done a phenomenal job of.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
since I've been familiar, and I'm sure beyond my purview. What's next for I Care If You Listen? I mean, are there any big moves ahead?
We do have something that we're working toward. Can't really say anything
Oh,
about it
okay,
yet.
okay.
But the main thing for us is just figuring out that next big step, figuring out how to make this something that's sustainable. It started as one person's personal blog and has grown into something that I think is a resource that a lot of people turn to and is serving a purpose that not a lot of other publications are serving, especially with our focus not only on contemporary music, but also with marginalized artists. So, yeah, we're just trying to figure out how we can go from our current volunteer structure to something that's going to bring us long term stability.
Well, when you're ready to let the secret out, let me know, because we're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
How can folks check out I Care If You Listen?
icareifyoulisten.com. We're also active on Facebook and Twitter. And the people who curate our social media, they are amazing. Natalie Kalma and Julia Kuhlman, they do such a great job of not only putting out our content, but also pulling in content from other resources in the new music scene. So follow us on social and icareifyoulisten.com.
So I thought it was really important to take this conversation into that moment, into the concert hall where the Gateways Music Festival began, and where Louis Farrakhan, gave this historic concert over in North Carolina. So Caroline Jones was there. She was the personnel manager and also one of the violists. And where we'll jump into my conversation with her is where she starts talking about how she became friends with the founder of the Gateways Music Festival and what happened next.
Yes, and you know, I'm a historian of this because I'm one of the original Gatewaydians, however you would like
Yeah.
to call it. Armenta, of course, it's Armenta Adams Hummings
Hmm.
Dumasani, excuse me. At the time, she was Mrs. Hummings. I was at North Carolina School of the Arts. It was before they were University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and her son Amadi was a violist at School of the Arts. I'm a violist, so we were all in the viola family
Hmm.
and master classes, orchestra, the whole nine yards. So that's how we all met. Then I met his mom, and she became the campus mom,
Okay.
looking after us, words and things of that nature. And I used to babysit her sons, the younger sons, when she decided to start going back into practicing, and she would practice and they would hang out with me in the dorm. So we built a camaraderie. We were family. We were really close. So after graduation and years later, we still stayed in touch. And she called me one day and said, I have this initiative that I would like to do. I really would like your help with it. At the time, I was working at the Greensboro Symphony Orchestra. Um, and I was the executive assistant and later personnel manager. So I was working with music. I was just accustomed, and I was an admin as well. I worked in a law office prior to that, and just administrative skills. So she said, I need your help with some things that I just don't do. And I was like, no problem. So she said, I'm going to start an orchestra, and it's going to be all black. And I want it to be in North Carolina because North Carolina doesn't have anything like that, and North Carolina needs something like that.
Mm.
And we're going to call it Gateways Music Festival. Are you in? I said, sign me up. And so we started from there. I helped her with, she told me persons to invite. I typed up letters. And, back then we were typing on the typewriter and writing a lot of notes and calling people long distance. And she was shaking bushes and trees and blood from a turnip and you name it to get the funding for this. So I was there at the very beginning of Gateways Music Festival, and it was exciting. When it finally came to that point, people started flying in, and it just blew my mind to see so many persons of my color.
Yeah.
I was and I cried a lot of times. I just had to turn and cry because I was just so excited to be at this venture. And they came in and they came to do serious work. She called in favors of artists from all over, and unbeknownst to me, that our famous artist was going to be playing at the end of the week because we were at School of the Arts
Hmm.
and doing chamber concerts and all various things. And uh, she had children come up from the Muhammad School. We had kids playing from Atlanta, South Carolina, people flying down from New York, Texas. I was just thrilled to see everyone of our color. So that's where it started, and we worked very hard.
Yeah.
And things were going great at the School of the Arts and performing and playing. Our Dodge and Pratt was there. I mean, we had grand pianos all over the stages, and the people at School of the Arts were like, wow.
Oh my
Their
goodness.
mouths were open the entire time. And I was like, yeah, right. This is my school. I went to school here. How you like me now? So it was really a great experience. And then, of course, the cherry on the sundae was to have the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan perform the Mendelssohn Concerto with the Gateway Symphony Orchestra in our final concert.
Yeah, and when I came across the video of Minister Farrakhan playing that solo piece, first and foremost, I was just blown away. I had no idea that he played the violin, and since seeing that video, I mean, I have spent every spare moment I have reading everything I can, watching every interview, watching the For the Love of Music documentary, and one of the things I learned, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly. The Gateways performance was actually it actually took place before the performance in Chicago that made it on tape. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were kind of I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, the guinea pig to let's see
Sure.
how this goes.
Sure.
So we were like the maiden voyage when he decided after over 30 plus years,
Yeah.
I'm going to pick the violin back up. And when he picked it back up and then came to Winston-Salem, and of course Winston-Salem's his roots. He
Hmm.
went to school in Winston-Salem,
Oh, wow.
and so coming back to North Carolina after all of these years, and of course, from what I'm understanding from history, he really did enjoy playing violin. He enjoyed the classical music, but upon joining the nation, he had to make a choice:
Right.
music or serve the nation. So he chose nation. But later on, I'm just assuming and thinking that maybe some said, "Oh wow, you used to play. Why aren't you playing now? Or maybe you should do this again." And music is a bridge. Music is a communication tool, and that's exactly how he came with it, to communicate through music. And it was phenomenal. He did a great job.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people were like, "I had no idea. I didn't know." But and I was excited, but on the other side, because I was personnel manager of Gateways, I had to think, I had to be on point, because of course with that came greater responsibility.
Right.
And I had to be on top of a lot of things: the security, working with the brothers of the nation, working
The
with
fruits of Islam.
oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I oh, sister. I never had so many people call me sister. Thank you, sister. Good morning, sister. Good afternoon, sister. Sister, may I interrupt you for a moment? We need to go over a developing detail. Sister, here is our list. Can you give me your list of the musicians? Can you tell me who to allow back at this door? Sister, we're going to have someone here. Sister, we're going to be here, but we won't be in your way. Do what you need to do. And I'm like, wow, they are a well-oiled machine. I actually took notes from them.
Yeah. Was he?
Yes.
Was the minister as controversial then as he seems to be these days?
Well, politically, he was highly controversial because that was the height of his popularity,
Right.
his speaking, his marching, his speaking and having rallies. People were protesting. People were outside protesting in various places. They were not fond of him at all because of his views on Caucasian persons. And they said he was anti-Semitist. He was against homosexuality. He was against this. He was against that. The white man was the blue-eyed devil. He's the devil, and there's nothing good in him. And we, as a people, need to rise up and handle things. So it was a radical time. So there was a lot of unrest. However, when it came to the decisions of performing, even with performing, as I mentioned, the Gateways Music Festival was hosted at North Carolina School of the Arts. They were glad to have us. There was funding in place. Everything was good to go. But when they found out that he was our featured artist, they pulled out. They said, we can't host him at our school because he's controversial and it'll look like we support him, and we're not going to do that. And Mrs. Cummings was like, well, he's an artist. He's coming as an artist. They said, we don't know that. And when you are an all-Black organization asking, seriously, an all-white organization for over $20,000 in funding, location, allowing us to use millions of dollars worth of your equipment, you've got to go with the flow. But a lot of the organizations pulled out. I think other than the Delta Arts, they stayed in and said, we'll support you. And we had a last minute saving grace of one of the journalists who owned the Winston-Salem paper, who wrote a check to make things happen.
Wow.
Anyway. And his name was Mr. Fowler. And then I don't know how this transpired, but word got out, of course, that he was coming. Word got out that School of the Arts turned him down. And someone was able to work things out where we had it at Reynolds High School in Reynolds Auditorium. And Reynolds Auditorium is huge. It was much larger than Crawford Hall at School of the Arts. And so they said, we'll have it there. And so that's what we did. We changed. That's why I say there were so many updates, and in working with the Fruits of Islam and security and things, and with that changing, I was a personnel manager. I was a violist. I was playing. I was making certain that music was handed out. We didn't have a librarian then. We just, put out music and worked with the librarian from School of the Arts, Maestro Michael Morgan. He's giving me notes and he's telling me, put this person here, sit here. So I was running around in circles per se, making sure that all of these things happen and being briefed. And just being told, listen, someone may come with a controversial statement. Someone may come to you with this, or someone may come to you with that. You just stay focused with the task on hand. I must say it went well. It went well to the point that, like, how you have a wedding and then the bride comes out married and happy, but
Sure.
she has no idea that you were in a car wreck, saved somebody from a heart attack before you got there.
Right.
So we dealt with that, and it was handled. So fortunately, the concert was there. It was well attended, contrary to maybe some of the articles, because the articles, although it's media, the articles, in my opinion, sounded pro-white. It made it sound more like, well, he's political. He's, he's this, and so therefore the organization said we can't have him, and quite frankly, we do understand. And then after his performance, we were pleasantly surprised. Wow. And then even mentioning his men, his security, and how their presence was known by their suits and bow ties. I mean, they were very descriptive of that. And I'm like, look, they're just the brothers.
Yeah.
And they're taken care of, but they took care of everyone. And I think that they were just very surprised that you would have that many persons. And of course, the nation showed up.
Yeah.
But my family was there. My mother was there. My father, my stepmother, my stepfather. I mean, my bonus family, everyone was there for this event. So he did say, even in the rehearsals, when he walked on stage, you could hear a pin drop. And he turned around and he said, "I'm nervous." And everyone said, it's just, He said, "I'm nervous." He said, "I want to say this before we start." He said, when I am Minister Farrakhan, I'm Minister Farrakhan. He said, "But today I'm a musician, just like you. So let's relax and let's make music." And then the second wave of shoulders went down. And then, of course, Maestro was like, so from there we went. And after, I think, striking a few notes, and then after playing through the Mendelssohn and rehearsals, then everyone was excited. Everyone was happy. All of these other things didn't even matter.
Yeah. And you've spoken to, what they say, which is, again, why I have, spent so much time doing my own research. I've done everything to watching his appearances on Donahue, his BET interviews, the things he's written, and including the concert in Chicago that followed the concert in North Carolina. And in that Chicago concert, I didn't see someone who was splitting people apart or trying to be divisive. In Chicago, it seemed, it more than just seemed like, what I saw was him trying to build that bridge between communities. I mean, considering the fact that he played a piece of music by Mendelssohn, the woman who coached him and taught him to prepare him for that moment was a Jewish woman.
Yes, exactly.
So much. What was that an outward? Was there an outward show of unity at the North Carolina concert?
There was an outward show of unity, absolutely. And I think even more so it was a better outward show after we had rehearsal with him.
Okay.
Because, of course, like I mentioned, the festival was already going on. Performances started as early as Wednesday, private home things, and Thursday, Friday, etc. But then by the time the concert came, the big concert, once we had that rehearsal and the musicians were able to gel with him, then we became a unified force together. That it would not matter what outside forces would say or do. Everyone was comfortable and able to relax. tracks, because if you could imagine how many persons came to me or were calling me, and of course there weren't cell phones and they calling me, blowing up my phone. I hear that is he actually coming? Oh my goodness. And I don't recall if any musicians stepped out and said, I can't do this or I won't support this. I don't remember. I don't remember anyone saying they wouldn't do it. I think everyone was just kind of nervous, anxious, excited, wondering. But like I said, once he made that statement, when I'm on stage, I'm a musician. When he said, I'm nervous, let's make music. And then Maestro Morgan, of course, conducted us. Like after that struck of the first note, then we really became a unified force. We were one. We were musicians of color making beautiful music. So when it was time for the performance, of course, the place was packed. Security was there. They were handling things. I was peeping from behind the curtain, like, woo, but it was a beautiful sight because when you looked to the left, all of nation was sitting there. The women, the men, they were donned, they were clean. But it was a beautiful sight. And then in the middle, you had your benefactors and you're mixed and, and so forth. So, but just to see that presence, but if you were a nervous person and knee jerk, you would say, oh my gosh, they're here. I'm nervous. Should I stay or what have you? We were backstage. Security was standing with me as every musician walked through the door. Every musician. They knew and they were like, sister, this. And I had to tell them who could come, who no, I don't know them. I don't, or if someone came to the backstage and asked for me, and then I could tell them who could come. Otherwise, everyone else had to go all the way around front and go through that security. Even with that, there were no incidents. There was nothing. And then when we performed, there was not a dry eye, and everyone was standing. It was a standing ovation, and it was like, wow. And then the media was like, oh my goodness, wow. And, and they spoke of it. But of course they still had to bring in that part, but it was great. And it was also a catalyst for Gateways because, Mrs. Hummings was struggling to find funding, but after that success, they were like, oh, we're down. When's the next one? When are we going to do this? She says, oh, next year. Because it's going to be annual.
Yeah.
And we need something like this down south because we don't have it. And it stayed until, of course, she went to Rochester and then they had conversations. But we did the best that we could with what we had. But that was the catalyst. That was the spark.
Wow.
And after that, it was Farrakhan the musician, not the political. And it doesn't matter what he may have said. The next day, he could have been on stage playing, and the next day, he may have said something about white persons, or he may have said something about his beliefs or what the nation believes, and, perhaps. But on that day, he was the musician. I still have that picture. We were backstage and he's laughing. His mouth is wide open. He's laughing. And I'm standing beside him, just grinning, just cheesing.
Yeah.
And of course, his men are around him, but we were backstage taking pictures with him. People were getting autographs. People were shaking his hand. It wasn't this, you can't. He was gracious. He welcomed everyone.
Oh, wow.
And he talked about it. He said, I was so nervous. Y'all, could y'all tell I was nervous? And I was like, no, I couldn't tell. I was like, I was nervous, and he says, well, I'm glad that's over. And we just laughed. He was just a musician. And he says, well, I'm thinking about, there may have been a couple of notes that I may have missed, or I said, well, that happens. We miss them too. And I said, isn't that what musicians do? And he was like, yeah, that's what musicians do. So it was one of those. And he talked to us. He spent time with us. It wasn't like he had to play and then they rushed him off. They gave him an opportunity to talk to persons, benefactors, persons who were very happy about it. And then when they finished, they whisked him off and he was gone. And we were all grinning and happy, and the musicians got paid, and
Yeah.
we went home.
You know what's most just impactful to me, you know, beyond his playing and being a catalyst for the Gateways Music Festival is the fact that the audience was so diverse, you know, and so many institutions talk about diversifying the audience these days, but not like that, right? I mean, it just seems interesting that the means of making that diverse audience, that diverse orchestral experience is one that folks just kind of want to stay away from in action, but they're dedicated to in word.
Absolutely. And it really was a different. I mean, just from what I remember, my gosh, there was salt and pepper everywhere. you know, I'm just saying, salt and pepper everywhere. And it wasn't. And as I mentioned, of course, the nation was there and they were sitting together, but it wasn't even segregation in a sense. They know to sit together.
Right.
They represent as a unit, so they sit together. But as I stated, in the center and orchestra left, it was just a myriad. And it was, I mean, there was Asian there, black, white, Indian. I mean, just
Jewish,
everyone.
I understand.
Children, yeah, children were there, little children, teenagers. I mean, the elderly, people, deep pockets and not so. So you even had your economic brackets there. So you had your six figures, and you had the people who gave money, and the symphony, the Winston Symphony people, and you know, of all of those natures, and then you had just regular persons. It was just wonderful. I'm just so grateful for the vision that Arminta had. That's a Moses vision. I'm sorry. My God. And I'm just grateful that I could be Joshua and Caleb in the midst of that.
Sure.
It was wonderful. But yes, the diversity, and the fact that she was beating bushes, she was knocking on doors. She came to our community as well and asked for funding, and some of the community assisted, some community, and the same as other communities. Well, you know what? Jump off the first one. Let us know how it goes. Maybe we'll help you next year. You know, some people, they look at that and like, well, I don't know. But once that concert jumped, once she said, oh, I'm going to pull it off. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but it's going to be done. And she did. And it was just one of those things where it's like, oh my God, she really did it.
Yeah.
She did it. I pulled my money out because I'm not supporting Farrakhan, and she did it anyway. So there's just so many nuggets in this. So many nuggets in this. But the diversity was phenomenal, and it's sad to say it was more diverse then than it is now.
Right. Yeah.
Because I play in the symphony, and my two parents are the two parents that are there, and maybe two or three other parents. I mean, we're diversing more with Greensboro Symphony. We are, and I pushed for that. However, the standard, the norm is classical musicians. We don't look for us in the audience.
Right. You know, as I've learned, and as you mentioned, the minister, you know, put down the violin for so many years to focus on his faith and being a thinker. In your opinion, what does it mean for the minister to have come back to music after all of those years? I mean, it seems like to me that, you know, his bond with music was just that strong.
Absolutely. And I think I would like to liken it to, it's like riding a bike.
Okay.
You know, it's like riding a bike. You know, I don't know who spoke to him. I don't know if he was in prayer time, or I don't know if someone walked up to him and maybe knew something of his past, saw pictures, or I don't know if he mentioned, hey, I used to play violin, and they were like, well, do you still play it? Can you play it now? I don't know that story, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad that light bulb went off and that he picked it up and decided, I'm going to do this. And I would like to liken it to, hey, I still got the juice. Let's do it. You know, not just let's pick up the violin and dust it off, but let's go on tour and play a concerto. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just, I haven't played in all of these years. I'm going to start practicing. I think I'm going to play a concerto with an orchestra, an all black one at that.
Yeah. But before
Who does that?
I know. You know, but before we wrap up here, you were a part of sort of the Facebook storm that came when I posted the video of his Chicago performance. And something that I noticed was that you had Black folks who really focus on his musicianship and the way that he leads and the way he wants liberation for Black folks. And then you had non-Black people who just felt an obligation to foreground and focus on his more controversial side. I mean, from your perspective, is the minister's lasting impact rooted in race? Does it draw that race line when it comes to folks who appreciate him and folks who can't not call foul on him every time they see him or hear his name?
I think that it causes a problem because people don't want to understand.
Mm.
They just want to go by what they knew or
What they've heard.
They go what they've heard, what they may know or knew. I say past tense knew, or what they've heard, and then what they really don't know.
Mm.
And what bothered me about that post when that person so graciously entered in and said, well, I would never play a concert with him. I don't care if we would get paid. He's an anti-Semitist. He's anti-this. He's anti-that. His thoughts, his beliefs, they're destructive. And I was reading this, and of course, you saw the one of the persons who was there, also Kim, who was like, it was my first time playing. I was excited. And they even came for her. Like, I can't believe you did. And I was like, oh, you gonna come for my girl? Not gonna have it. No, not gonna happen. You're not coming for my girl and you're not coming for my people. Because I hired her to play this concert, you know? Yeah. And that's why I was very brief in entering the door. See, my thing is I'm gonna let you open the door. If you open the door and invite me in, if I cut you, that's your fault.
Yeah.
So she opened the door and I believe I said when he's on stage, he's a musician. You know, when he's in the pulpit, he's minister. And then I said his words, period, because that's what he said.
Right.
And she just kept going, nah, 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 nah. So that's why I was like, you know what, let me pull up a couple of articles about white conductors, white music that Black people play. And when I pulled that up, there was nothing else to be said. And then everybody else was like, bravo, I'm glad you said what you said. I mean, I try not to go there per se. I don't want to argue with anyone, especially on social media. Mm-hmm. And once you put it out there, it's there. But with the climate of how things are happening now and the fact that I grew up in this climate, I am one of the children who was able to go to a segregated school. But when I was born, I was in integrated school, But when I was born, there was still segregation. Mm. So by the time I got to first grade, second grade, by the time I think got to third grade, they were integrating schools. You know, my dad was like, well, do you want to go to an integrated school? And I was like, what's that? He said, well, that's where Black kids and white kids go to school together. Because I went to an all-Black elementary school. Sure. The first 2 grades. And so I was like, sure, let's do it. Because our family was very diverse. Mm-hmm. We had very bright. We have blue eyes in our family. We had, we have a little bit of everything. We're a melting pot. So I was accustomed to seeing this. So it didn't bother me at all. But what was interesting is even when I was at the Black school, all of my teachers were white. Mm. But I think I had 1 Black teacher, maybe 2 in all of my years. But getting back to the point, just being in a segregated point, I was more open for it. But when she made that comment, I was just like, it just took me back to, I remember when, I remember how, and I know how our forefathers paved the way for us to have it better, to have a great education, a quality education, quality way of life. And now with the climate of things going on, I had to say something and I had to let her know, no, you're just not going to come in here because of your thoughts. And well, he's just so violent. How do you know? Have you been there? Has he ever laid hands on you? Mm-hmm. Has someone from Nation touched you? Has someone from Fruit of Islam called you? No. You're just saying what you want to say. And we just had to shut that down. Let her know. Don't it's not a matter of defending him. It's the defending the musicality and understanding. Don't talk about what you don't know. Yeah. Plain and simple. Just leave it alone. And I can say in the years of my seeing him, reading the final call. I've read the final call. I've had a bean pie. I'm fine with that. And he calls me sister.
Yeah.
Nobody else, everybody else, call me sister. Don't call me girl.
Yeah. Or something worse,
I've been called that too. And I was playing in a symphony when it happened.
Wow.
God, Jesus, Lord. Woo, I went there. I'm back. I'm back. So I'm just saying that's part of it. But just had to let her know that and then that's when we were talking about him. I could talk about it because I knew. I met him. I talked with the man, broke bread with the man, made music with the man, worked with his organization. So I could speak on what I knew. That's why I just tell her politely, be quiet.
Yeah. For folks who want to reach out to you, learn more about what you're doing, if there's something you want to plug, anything you want to throw out.
Oh my goodness. Well, if you want to hit me up, I'm on Facebook. Caroline Jones. Caroline Diva is as Diva does.
Amen.
I'm on Instagram. Caroline Diva is as Diva does. And you can reach me there, inbox me if you want to talk some more about those things or talk about diverse initiatives, because a lot of the orchestras are doing that. I am on a diversity team with our orchestra. I said, you can't have a diversity team if you don't have someone who's in the orchestra who's Black that can tell you some things.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in Greensboro Symphony 36 years now. I think I could have a voice. I'm grateful that I'm at this point and at this time where I can have a voice to say some things, to spread knowledge, spread love, whatever I can do.
Thank you to Caroline Jones for joining me to explore a bit of the beginnings of the Gateways Music Festival and how that involved the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. And a huge thank you and shout out to Amanda Cook from I Care If You Listen for also helping us engage that conversation. So this is movement 4, the Triloquy, and instead of giving you what we usually give you, I decided to do a quick solo triloquy since this opus of the podcast has already been trill enough. So I had to do a lot of soul searching when I decided to theme an opus of the podcast around the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. I am fully aware, as are, all Black people, I would say virtually all Black people, we are fully aware of the words that he has said that have been misconstrued or, in the opinions of many, rightfully identified as homophobic, anti-Semitic, and everything else you can throw. I'm not here to invalidate that as much as I'm here to make the point that there's so many parts of our own music history, and I mean the history of Black folks in this country, that flies by the radar because certain people rule the narrative. I'm not here to say that the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is a blameless man, as much as I'm here to say that we have to begin figuring out how we can tell our own stories. The fact that Louis Farrakhan helped kick off a music festival that I am involved with every year, and this is something that I don't know, is reason 1,000,001 why I think it's so important that this podcast really centers and explores those unexplored conversations, those uncomfortable stories, and those things that we just can't count on the white-led institutions to teach us. Did the people who first taught you about the Honorable Louis Farrakhan tell you that he was a violinist, one who studied under a Jewish violin teacher, a woman who said that she could never consider him anti-Semitic? Did the person who taught you about Louis Farrakhan tell you about the work that he's done for countless Black communities, or did they just throw some bad words toward him? Yeah? No? Okay. See you next time.